welcome all. Welcome to this panel on working on current and future governance and control of AI and algorithms. My name is Gerald Hopster. I'm a senior coordinator at the Department for the Oversight of Algorithmic, no, for the Coordination of Algorithmic Oversight. It's a new department, so I can still make this mistake. It's a new department within the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens, in addition to their activities as the Dutch DPA. So it's a new task that we have. And what we are doing, we are focusing as a department on AI and algorithmic risks when it comes to fundamental rights. So it's quite a big task that we have. And we do three specific elements. We are monitoring risks and incidents. You can also see our observations. We publicize a risk report, algorithmic and AI risks in the Netherlands, every 6 months. There's one upcoming in about 6 to 8 weeks. That's the first thing that we do. The second thing is that we are coordinating and cooperating with other national authorities and regulators. And the third thing is that we are providing guidance and information on existing and new legislation. Also, where possible, together with new regulators, other regulators, but also with organizations in the field. So that's what we are doing. Why are we organizing this panel? We are living in exciting times. It's very interesting that we are like in an interbellum. We are in between existing legislation that has been here for quite a few years, the GDPR, for example, but still needs our attention when it comes to new technologies like AI and algorithms. And there's also new legislation that has just come into force or is still upcoming in the next few months or years. But the technology is developing quite fast, and the adoption is also quite fast and broad. So we need to do something now. But the question is, who should do something, and what should we do, and what can we do? Welcome. So that's what we are going to talk about with this panel. Who should act? What can we do? What tools are there? What instruments are there? And we are fortunate that we have 4 panelists with very different perspectives. So I'm going to introduce them, and then we are going to discuss a few topics. And in the end, we will try to have enough time for questions from the audience. First of all, on my right-hand side is Audrey Planck. Audrey is one of the deputy directors of the OECD, the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation. She's responsible for their work on digital policy, including data governance, data flows, AI and emerging technologies, online safety and security, but also connectivity and infrastructure. Quite broad perspective. She has a background in digital economy, digital security and international affairs. Then next to her is Vanja Skoric. Vanja is Program Director for Global and EU Engagement Programs at the European Centre for Not-for-Profit Law. She has 20 years of experience in legal analysis, advocacy, education and research. She leads their work on securitization, counterterrorism and anti-money laundering measures, specifically when they impact civil society, but also their engagement in digital and AI issues. And she's also an external PhD candidate at the Civic AI Lab of the University of Amsterdam. Then next to her we have Juriaan Paris. Juriaan is a statistician. I'm always glad to have a statistician present here. And an AI policy watcher. He co-founded the NGO Algorithm Audit. This NGO focuses on bias testing and normative standards. And as a director of Algorithm Audit, he's responsible for building Algo Prudence. If you want to know what that is, I think you will come to that, and otherwise ask him. And they're also implementing and testing open source tools for AI bias testing and contributing to technical standards for AI. Then next to him we have Nena Dragicevic. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Nena is an independent legal expert on privacy and AI, and she's also currently a board member for privacy engineering at IAPP. With 7 years of experience in assessing, implementing, and auditing global data protection frameworks as a regulator and practitioner, I can say Nena is the one to go to when you want to know what's needed in an organization. So that's our panel, and we are going to try to discuss who should do something and what can be done, and specifically, what can we do today or tomorrow morning? Let's try to get to the real stuff. So the first question, I will ask it for everyone. I will start with Audrey, and then we'll go to the next ones until we have Nena. The simple question actually is, who or where should organizations go for practical knowledge or tools? Where should you start? And also, what's your organization doing in these fields? Can you tell us something about this, Audrey?
Yeah, thank you, and hello to everyone. You might notice I'm not Karine Perset, but if you know Karine Perset, she's just traveling this week, so I'm a imperfect substitute for Karine, who runs our AI team in my division at the OECD. So before I dive in a little bit, the title of this panel was about algorithms, and I just will say that we talk at the OECD about AI systems, which includes input, context and data into a model, and then the output. So we try to think of what's happening in AI as from a system perspective and not just from an algorithmic perspective. So what's the OECD doing? We have, broadly speaking, our objective is to provide evidence and to make policy approaches interoperable among across the world, and certainly within our members, but also well beyond. So on AI, we've been doing that for quite some time, starting with our principles that date back to 2019. But as I said in another panel today, the principles are really great, but implementation is even better. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is take the broad concepts of the principles that the OECD has and implement them and help countries implement them in their policy regulatory frameworks and their structures in working in a safe, in a sort of trustworthy, to develop and implement trustworthy AI. So that means we're harmonizing definitions, we're harmonizing terminology, and we're building what we call an evidence base by looking and trying to develop a more real-time perspective on what's happening in the AI ecosystem. So if you're familiar with the OECD, we're a data body. We have a lot of statistics. We deal with national statistical agencies. We deal with, we put out lots of predictions about GDP growth and all sorts of other things. And when you start to go into the AI space, by the time you get any official statistics about AI, it's many years too late for policymakers to develop their approaches. So we're also trying to bring novel data approaches and measurement approaches to understanding AI. Everything from what kind of languages are happening, what kind of languages are models being built on, and what does that mean for digital divides, to how much money is being invested, both at the firm level and at the country level, to what do patent applications look like in AI space, all to provide more real-time data to policymakers as they're putting together their AI strategies. Because their AI strategies are not just about protecting, are not just about safety. Safety is a big, important piece, but they're also about enabling AI to flourish in their economies. They're also about R&D and investment. It's also about productization. It's also about using AI in government. So the strategies are broad, and in order to inform such a broad strategy, that's basically our mission. And I think, just to give a concrete example and then turn back to the moderator, we defined an AI system back in 2018, 2019, and we recently updated that definition, and the definition has been used in the EU AI Act. It's also been used in the Council of Europe's Treaty on AI. So we're trying to get interoperability in what we're trying to regulate and what we're trying to make policy about. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Then I have the same question for Vanya. What is ECNL doing, and who is at play here? Who are the players?
Thank you. So I'll maybe start with one of the largest players in this space, but with the seemingly least power and the most fluid one, which is the public, an interested public. And that can mean a smaller group of very focused activists, civil society, journalists, bloggers, or impacted people, so people who are actually affected by AI in some way. Or it can be in a larger group, community, vulnerable groups, minorities, or outraged public at large when there is a scandal happening, as we experience from time to time in our country. Currently there is no, if we talk about the, for example, member states of the EU, but also broader, there is no clear or evident or formal processes in involving or engaging the public in any type of either AI strategy development, regulation development, or implementation as we face with the AI Act. So it's only dependent on the goodwill and capacity of individual institutions, such as the AP, and I need to compliment here our hosts, and their capacity and willingness to actually organize actively that engagement and reach out actively to some of the organizations or some of the public members to contribute and engage in some way. So ideally, that public engagement should be structured. And should become easily accessible, especially for those who need and want to flag concerns or input or add to implementation or focus on harms and potential offsetting of those harms. Then there is a second player that also is becoming more and more important from our perspective, which is the national human rights institutions. From the human rights perspective and human rights concerns perspective. And they need to be embedded in a way, in some kind of official structured role in the implementation process if we talk about AI regulation and norms. And some of the more active institutions in some countries have started claiming that role, especially in European space. But the national governments can actually act even now to help structure those roles and help open up the spaces for their involvement. And one role that ECNL looks into more and more is kind of flagging the importance of and supporting the multi-stakeholder spaces for discussion and cross-sectoral groupings and networking, where interested public, civil society organizations, but also other relevant stakeholders from the public and the private sector can actually debate safely, discuss the implementation, support the implementation, and the effective monitoring and supervision for regulation. So in some, if we think what can we do already, it's not a rocket science. It kind of boils down to very boring but very core democratic processes in a country. So public institutions and governments can act now to establish such engagement and participation infrastructure. And we like to think about it as an infrastructure, because if we have attempts to create infrastructure for innovation and for tech development, we also want to create infrastructure for civic participation in these processes. So let's innovate public engagement in the implementation of AI.
Great. I think I agree with a lot of this. Then the next one, Juriaan, same question for you.
Thanks. And let me first start with sharing a personal story that I was validating models in financial industry and was fascinated as a statistician why are certain choices made. And I try to boil it down as a validator. Why do you make this decision to put a threshold on 5K or 50K for, I don't know, flagging customers or clients for being assigned as riskful rather than not riskful? So that fascinated me. Why this threshold? Why the criteria? And you see this kind of profiling or risk profiling all around us in society, not only in the private sector, but as well in the public sector, especially in the Netherlands. So that was a personal motivation for me as a statistician / validator to start thinking about this from a not-for-profit perspective, because a lot of validation is happening now from within this market controls, market paradigm, which is not ideal to think about the common good. So that was a reason to start with case-based work from both a quantitative and qualitative perspective. And that's what we are working on with algorithm audit. And who should act? We see different actors in the field of today's society. Politics, for instance, and not the ideal candidate to take decisions about all normative questions. There is simply not enough time for it to discuss everything in political arenas. Then you have policymakers not having the representative legitimacy to take all those decisions, but are formulating important abstract principles about what should be done. For instance, an algorithm cannot discriminate, thanks, but how? Difficult question. courts can only decide when certain cases are submitted to their space where they can act. So there should be a court filed or something submitted to the court. Then there are supervisory authorities where we see the most important role to play, and there are many of them. There are in the Netherlands only 27. There are quite a lot, and kind of finger pointing towards each other. No, no, you should act. You should act. No, you should act. In the meantime, human rights are not new. EU non-discrimination law is not new. But last week, again, it was published that a risk profile of a huge Dutch public agency has been indirectly discriminating many students over the last 10 years. So how on earth is that possible with all this existing legislation in place already for many years, protecting citizens, and we try to boil it down to exactly these criteria. Why is it differentiated upon education, distance to parents, age? Why? Keep asking the question, the why question, which when that can be discussed in public, ultimately fosters democratic decision-making upon these important topics in the future. So I think this institutional impasse should be inspired by more transparency about normative questions, which can be resolved in the open, such that all can contribute to this discussion, inspires politics, and as well inspires critics to send a reaction on certain decisions made by AI engineers or diverse teams deciding upon all those important models that have more power over us in the digital future.
Great, thank you, Juriaan. Then on to Nena.
So, as Gerald already said, I used to work at the Dutch DPA as well. And after the Dutch DPA, I worked for Boston Consulting Group, a daughter that was specialized in providing customized AI solutions to clients. So basically an AI developer. Having worked within this role, I would say that additional actors which are important in the landscape are, of course, companies, whether they're multinationals, whether they're SMEs that can assist companies wanting to introduce AI into their processes. In addition to that, given the requirements in existing case law under GDPR, sometimes it is necessary to have additional support from other service providers. Think of specialized consultancy firms that can help with change management and helping the employees who are required to work with the AI to embed it in the systems and to see how it can work operationally. In the case that the client is a multinational and wants to have an AI solution for a global target market or for several countries, it might also be wise to ask for external advice from specialized law firms regarding sectoral requirements that might be necessary to take into account from a privacy design point of view for the developers and for the data scientists. So these are things that one needs to take into account during the development phase already. What I also would like to point out, and I think there is more requirement for that in the future, there are already a number of risk frameworks out there, standards that are advising companies who work with AI to invite public interest groups to share their thoughts on how you can ensure that bias is not an output of your model. You can imagine that working in a company, the development team might not be that diverse, so it might be difficult to take into account how your AI would impact people from a certain gender, ethnicity, in a certain context. I agree fully with you that it's very difficult to put that into practice, but I do think there is an interest and also a necessity to see how we can get the input from those parties to see whether whether there's something possible from a technical point of view on how to build that in your AI. And finally, I also would like to point out 2 resources that are already out there that you can also use for yourself. So one of them is like your internal stakeholders that you would want to involve in the development and deployment process. So the IAPP recently published a role matrix of persons that you want to involve both in the development and deployment process. And another very good resource is also the impact assessment of human rights and algorithms from the University of Utrecht, an organization that has developed a risk framework already 3 years ago, much in advance of all the other framework institutions, standardizations that have just recently published their standards and frameworks. So this organization has already 3 years of experience and also gives workshops on how to actually do risk mitigation when developing or deploying AI.
Thank you, Nena. Then we come on to the question, because we have now a broad overview of who are the players here. And as you can hear, quite a lot of players. It's not easy to say, okay, you are now the one to do something, because almost everyone has to do something. But what should be done, and how can we do this? What are the first things we can go to? What are simply the websites we can open as an organization to start? So what are the tools, what are the instruments that we can use, that we can do something? And what are the practical lessons that we have learned from other legislations, other frameworks from the past, that we can use to govern AI and algorithms and have good control, to be responsible in doing this? So that's the main thing of the second round. I wanted to start with Juriaan, because you have quite a lot of ideas on how to do things, so much that you have founded an NGO specialized in bias testing, in also standards. So I wanted to ask you, what's the first thing that organizations should do to safeguard fundamental rights? What should they start with, not tomorrow, but today? And also, what are the misconceptions that are there and you want to get rid of?
Maybe start with the latter question. Thanks for the question, Gerald. Why are there additional tools needed in the first place? Because some people argue, especially from the legal doctrine, there are already enough legal instruments and tools. For instance, non-discrimination law, as mentioned earlier. But our concern is that it's too generic often, the legal standards that are there already, the principles of non-discrimination, it should be fair, transparent, explainable, etc. What does it mean in a concrete use case? So legal standards are quite generic, they are there, but they need to be concretized, not sure whether, or contextualized is maybe the best English word. And that's difficult to apply that in the AI context. You see that with harmonized standards under the AI Act as well. It is not easy to come up with one bias test for all AI. It's really context dependent, and that's why it's so generic and not concrete and applicable. So I see some good abstract principles from law, perfect, but how to make it work in bottom-up practice, especially algorithmic practice, quite challenging. Then people turn towards governance mechanisms, where we say, hey, we have all certain roles and responsibilities within our organization, either it's public or private, and there has been a lot of consultants working on this, how to do proper governance frameworks for AI. But governance alone is not enough. Say you are filling in a fundamental rights impact assessment. You as a team, you are then responsible for resolving human rights tensions. That's quite a lot. That's fundamental. Who am I to resolve fundamental right tensions? Isn't that up to institutions to guide us there? Especially in the last 70, 80 years in Western Europe, institutions have been guiding in protecting certain fundamental rights, and now we as a group of AI engineers working on this project are responsible for that. Wow, okay, so it's not enough. We need more institutional guidance to do that. And we compared 10 fundamental rights impact assessments from different disciplines, and not disciplines, but different countries over the last months. We see no stats being represented in the fundamental rights impact assessment. What's step 1 of risk profiling? Test your assumption in your profile for your criteria. Statistical hypothesis testing, it's stats 101, but it's nowhere. So the Z-test, the T-test, bring it to the toolbox of validating algorithms and AI. So that's what our work is about. We just published a data set from the Dutch National Office of Statistics on the migration background of 300,000 students over the last 10 years, and you can apply Z-tests to that. You can apply clustering methods to do unsupervised bias detection rather than measuring everything labeled to the protected ground that's available. There are many statistical concepts that can be applied to deploy AI in a responsible manner. So that would be my plea to include that as well in the validation paradigm of AI. And what you can do tomorrow is to start doing fundamentals of stats and maybe improve statistical literacy as well in your organization or in your personal capacities.
And do you have any idea why it is that those basic tests from statistics are not included? Or are you just guessing when I ask this question?
Well, I think the underlying, there is a lot of talent working in private sector, not that much in policy making. So I think for policymakers, there's not that much stats being there around. Could be the case. Other hypothesis is that, I don't know actually. What do you think?
I think a lack of statistic knowledge is one of the elements, but it's difficult to say what it would be exactly. But you are bringing tools to the market to do this. Can you tell us something about those tools?
Sure. So statistical hypothesis testing is one. It's not really a tool because it has been a tool in the econometrics toolbox already for over the last 80 to 200 years. So we just try to maybe then promote it or do the marketing around it that say, hey, we should look into this as well. Of course, governance is important. Who decides? You should all take care about that. But as well, please do the basics of stats. Besides, there is this entire focus on supervised bias testing where we should know who belongs to what protected group. Either you have ethnicity A, B, or C, or belongs to gender A, B, or C, or etc. You can apply unsupervised methods with stats known as clustering as well to see what groups of people are structurally treated differently than other groups, and then post hoc examine what the characteristics are of certain clusters that are deviating. That can be applied, and as well synthetic data generation can be applied at a large scale by public sector organizations, but as well private sector organizations to improve and enhance trust in the representativeness of data sets being used to train all those different models and risk prediction models, etc. So that would be a push for more transparency about representativeness and giving openness to external parties, not only civil society organizations, but as well formal second-party auditors, for instance, to do a check on whether data is representative or not. So I think these are three elements: Z-testing, statistical hypothesis testing, that's the one, unsupervised bias detection, and synthetic data generation, which can be applied tomorrow.
Okay, great. I think we keep questions in the panel until after this round. I think that's the good way to go. Nena, I want to ask you next. You have quite some experience with organizations and how they are dealing with these kind of things. Can you tell us something about what are the common concerns and challenges there? And what is needed, or what are some pro tips that you want to give organizations for what to do? And also you mentioned just now the challenge of having a non-diverse development team. If you have any knowledge on this, can you tell us something about what you encountered or how they dealt with this? Are there some tips or ideas how you can deal with non-diverse teams, for example?
Okay, thank you. What I think we are now, I mean, with the AI Act, but also with the GDPR and a lot of case law giving guidance on what we need to take into account regarding algorithmic transparency, human oversight. we see more and more regulators giving guidance on how they look at the role determination for controller and processor. Thank you so much. Does this work? Yes. So I recall when I was first working for a company that was solely focusing on software development. From a role perspective, software development is easy because the client that wants a specific software determines the purposes and the means. And for a software developer, it's quite easy to remain in that processor role. Whereas I believe that with AI, that has become more difficult. We recently had this case law from the Court of Justice where there was more clarification on the joint controller role. And we have also seen that the ICO, one of the first regulators to give more guidance on how to establish the roles between an AI developer and the client that's asking for the developer's services. And what the ICO did was specify that with certain decisions related to the model, the parameters, like there's a whole list of things that decisions have to be made of, like what data do you use, what's the source, how do you combine, which technology do you use, things that would normally be classified as technical measures, but things that are very important and influential on how a model is impacted and how it functions. So if a client, a company that's a multinational and that might be a consumer product provider whose internal data scientist, data analytics team does not have the same knowledge as the specialized AI developer that they're hiring, in my point of view, it might be difficult to still argue that you have this classical controller-processor role. It might be that there is a joint controller role. So more guidance on that would be helpful. What I also see happening more in practice, we are seeing more collaboration with different parties when developing AI. So I was already referring to specialized consultancy firms that know how to do change management. Specialized law firms that can help companies to identify when a tool is created that has a global scope or that has countries in Asia, China, whatever. Developing AI tools is expensive. There is a huge demand. The skills at, people that know how to do their job well, that's limited. So there's a lot of clients that want to have tools that have a global reach. Of course, there's a possibility to create tools that are for regional target market. I have seen a huge demand for tools that are more on a global level. What is also a challenge when getting together with a client and trying to find use cases where an AI could be helpful, could support, is trying to find departments or sectors where discrimination is not it doesn't happen so much, because if the client is delivering a data set and it is very likely that discrimination happened in the past, you would have to do a lot of treatment during the data cleansing in order to make sure that your AI is not discriminatory. So what I've seen in practice, certain departments or sectors, it's just more difficult to get it right. And last point regarding the non-diverse development team, I think, and you can actually see that in a lot of these international standards and practices which have been published. In almost all of them, there is the advice that it would be good to get public interest groups or groups that are representing certain minorities or gender, to involve them in the development and the testing phase, because they might have advice that you might not have thought about. Thank you.
Thank you, Nena. Next, I wanted to ask Vanja about interesting developments and tools that you see in Europe, but also can you tell us something about how citizens are involved in those tools, or if they are not, or are there any opportunities to do so?
Sure, but I'll start with trying to tackle the why question that was brought up here for a good reason, and maybe the way to do it holistically and context dependent, actually, because this is a systemic way of approaching it. And one of the mechanisms and tools already mentioned is starting with the why question and all the kind of impacts and implications from the beginning, so from the design. And the way to do it is borrowing from the assessment processes, so impact assessment methods and processes as a key starting point. But what we see lacking, so there are different methods being tested, piloted, and so on. What we see lacking as a kind of contextual framework is criteria for these different methods. So how they should be established in order to actually be useful, meaningful, contents dependent, and actually answer the why and then later on how question. So as an important kind of 5 dimensions of these criteria, we see the normative framework as a basis for these types of assessments, addressing the scope, the content, the benchmarks, what should be included, which types of disciplines or tools should be involved, including the statistics, but also legal, financial maybe, types of impact that need to be assessed, and enforcement or rewards mechanisms for assessment. Then the process rules. So at what stage the assessments need to be made for AI systems in order to be meaningful and useful. What are the key procedures? Who needs to be involved? The independence of the assessors, the validation of the assessments, all kind of process rules. Very boring, but very crucial and important. The third one is methodology. So what type of indicators to use, scales, measurements, guidance for balancing the competing interests. Freya was mentioned here, the fundamental rights impact assessment being piloted in the Netherlands. That gives us some of the answers. They're also being updated and iterated as contexts evolve, so we can learn from them. The fourth dimension is engagement. So this is what was already mentioned by other people on the panel. So engagement of different individuals and groups and how they are getting engaged in the assessment, in the design, in the development, tackling the issue of identifying those that need to be engaged. And especially important, their input for the why question, right? So because the groups outside of the small development team are the only ones who can actually give the answer to that question. And then the fifth dimension is the oversight. This is where you kind of fit in, right? So where's the oversight of the assessment processes and concerns, the documentation of it, the publication requirements, and we see that kind of hicking up in the DSA implementation, the monitoring and the feedback mechanism, and not only the stick, but also the carrot for those who are actually conducting the assessment. And what's the role of maybe regulatory sandboxes in that context, and can that help? So this is kind of a framework that we see missing still. And within that framework, we also see missing the methods and opportunities for the stakeholder engagement. So how to actually involve that public interest groups. What are the methods that we can borrow from decades and decades of public work on participation and consultation? Many of these processes don't work well. And every civil society colleague here in the audience will tell you that we are all disillusioned with participation and engagement. Can we do it better? Please, in this context, because it's really important to do it better. Can we pilot it through different methods and frameworks? we at ECNL developed a framework for meaningful engagement. We are piloting it now with the City of Amsterdam. They are going even beyond what we imagined. They're going into the co-creation with citizens because they are co-creating the AI for scan vehicles, for the use on the streets. Complete input from the citizen panel, from the citizen survey. So from the start, addressing the why question, addressing the concerns, and then addressing the actual method of the implementation, not bringing in citizens and interest groups at the end when everything is already decided. So that's the engagement that is meaningful.
I have one question about this, because we see a lot of organizations who are struggling with how do we engage with citizens, with consumers, how are we going to do this? So I'm glad to see that some organizations are piloting or getting there. But you say that the City of Amsterdam almost immediately made the next step to co-creation. How did it come to be?
It was a journey. So I remember being at the first meeting when we started talking about the idea. The first meeting was all about addressing all the fears. And it was all about, we cannot do this. Yeah, so it was all about, we are not going to be allowed to do this by the higher levels. If we do this, we are opening ourselves to all sorts of criticism. If we are transparent, everybody will attack us. So there was a kind of a line of barriers lined up on the table, and we discussed through each and one of them, and through all these processes and discussions internally, they went all the full circle, I would say. They went all the 360 degrees into the, okay, let's actually do this with citizens, as opposed to, kind of shielding ourselves from the citizen input and potentially criticism. So yes, we will be open to criticism, but at least we will do it together at the same table with citizens. It's not a perfect process. It's just it's also a learning process for everybody involved, right?
And for someone in the audience here who says, okay, I need to do this, I want to do this in my organization, what's the one or two things that they should be careful of or they immediately should do? What are the best tips?
Be as honest and as transparent about what you are offering. Because the first question, for example, for that team in the City of Amsterdam was, what do these people actually can input? What can they change with their input? Have you already set on a certain AI system and solution you want to do, and then the input will not actually be changing that, yeah? So if yes, you need to communicate that immediately. So be as open as possible as to what me as a citizen, as a public, can actually change and affect with my participation and input. And then you will see if I'm interested to spend my time on that, or I'll watch, Boer en zoek een vrouw. My attempt of Dutch.
There are some Dutch people in the room, I can hear. Okay, great. That's thank you. I think that's very useful. Then next we go to Audrey. Well, the OECD is a big organization in this field, and you have quite a big toolbox actually, or you're building a toolbox. What is in that toolbox? Who should pick it up tomorrow? And what are the few unused elements or things that people should watch out for or use immediately?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So it's true. We have quite a few tools. I guess maybe I'll back up to the sort of one of the basic tools, which is a classification system that we developed a couple of years ago, which is a simplified way of walking through. Basically assessing what an AI system is doing. It's targeted toward policymakers so that you could then sort of understand what you're dealing with, basically. And the classification of AI system is a tool, and it's been used by lots and lots of people, lots of AI research institutes, and hopefully by policymakers. We don't know, but that exists today. It's existed for a while. There's examples of you take a system and you put it up against the tool, and it should help you understand what kinds of outputs are going to come and what kind of considerations you should be thinking about. So that's one tool. The second tool I'll mention is actually a set of tools. It's a catalog of tools. If you go to OECD.ai/catalog, we long anticipated several years ago that there would be a need for organizations to have access to tools for bias detection, for data verification and safety and security issues. And so we started to develop this catalog. We call it a catalog. I don't know why, but why not? And there's basically three types of tools. There's educational tools, there's like normative tools, and then there's technical tools. So if you go there, you can see, and it's contributed to, it's a public database. It's contributed to by anyone who wants to contribute. If you're using AI tools in your organizations, you can contribute that tool to the catalog, and you can go in and look for bias detection tools or whatnot. And I think that the attempt there is to make these tools available in a single place, to make them, to put them in light, or mettre en évidence, if you have any, so that people can see them and use them. And eventually what we're trying to do with that over time is to eventually be able to measure what tools are being used for who, by whom, and what for. That's a longer term project. But if organizations developing in their attempts to develop and deploy trustworthy AI systems, if we can map what tools they're actually using, then we can have a better sense of what's happening, what's working, what's not working. So, but those tools exist today. There's more than 600 tools in this catalog, so it's not just a few, and people are contributing to it all the time. So. That's the second piece I'll mention. The third piece I'll mention is an effort that we launched. We've been working on it for a while. None of this stuff falls out of the sky. It takes many years of development and preparation, but that we launched at the Paris Peace Forum in November of last year, which is our AI Incidents Monitor. And so, again, we've expected that over time, regulation would want to know about incidents related to AI systems. And so the problem is that we don't know about incidents related to AI systems because there's not information about that. We don't have administrative data from governments about that. We don't have, companies don't report that information yet. They will have to under the AI Act and probably under other pending legislation. So we started down a very imperfect, admittedly, path to start to try to track incidents related to AI systems. So we built a monitor based on publicly reported credible news sources, and we developed a model to weed things out and to categorize things, make sure we don't have duplicates, all that good stuff. And we mapped those incidents to the AI principles, so the principles around, and on the side also developed some harmonized and standardized terminology around what was an incident, what is a hazard. And so we also know that a lot of regulation is going to look at incidents, and so we need to know what an incident is, and we need to know how to categorize those incidents. So we did all that work. That paper on the categorization of incidents and hazards just came out last week. But the incidents monitor today it's just based on publicly available reporting from credible news sources. In the future, the next version of that tool will come probably later this year, and will have the functionality to allow for self-reported incidents. So if you're a citizen or you're a company or whoever you are, and you think there's been an incident or there's been a hazard as a result of a system, you can report that in. You should be able to report that into this tool. It's not live yet, that part, but the incident monitor is. You can look by country, you can look by type of harm, and again, we're trying to build a picture of what's happening, because as colleagues have already said, there's a lot of unknown, and we have to start somewhere. And if we wait for all regulation to come into place, we're too far away from the way, it's years from now. I mean, we have to start. So those are things that are available today. And there's much room for improvement on them, no question about that. And we always, usually at the end of every year, we launch a big public, help us make it better. What other kind of data sources do you want? So we're always open here at the OECD on the AI team. You can always email oecd.ai@oecd.org, I think it is. Anyway, it's on the observatory with ideas, criticisms, thoughts of how we can make it better. And then I guess the fourth thing, which I sort of said already, is just the whole data source. All the data sources on the observatory are meant to help provide tools so that people can understand what's happening. So we look at like knowledge transfers, where skills demands are coming. You can look at all of that data by country or by region. You can look at, where jobs are, where they're coming from, where they're leaving to, that kind of stuff. So that's a tool that's available today, again, based on our access to different sorts of data sets. So thank you.
And one question about this, what is the one thing that's being requested that you don't already have but want to develop in the future?
One thing that's been requested that we are in the process of developing is an index. So we can spend some time debating the value of indices, but the truth is there are quite a few AI indexes out there. And so we've been asked at the OECD, because it's part of what we do as an organization, to think about developing an index, a country index related to the OECD AI principles. So that's a tough, difficult job, and so we're working on that. But countries ask us for that because if you look at some of the indices that are out there, they're maybe a little less rigorous than we would maybe perhaps expect coming out of the OECD. So we're gonna try to do that. I guess the other thing where we get asked for all the time, which is not really a technical tool, is harmonization, interoperability on policy. So we work a lot on that. And then I guess the other thing we've really, it's very technical and a bit narrow, but when we think about investment in AI, you get a lot of headlines around, VC venture capital investment in OpenAI was X amount, and so the numbers are fantastically huge, particularly when you're talking about big American companies and VC coming from the United States. But we've been really trying to crack the nut on what does internal firm VC investment look like in their own AI, and it's really hard because this doesn't show up in publicly reported financial disclosures and stuff. So it's not like you can go get a database of venture capital investments and look at that. But we know that firms are investing in AI and inside their own firms. You heard from that side of the table experiences, but we don't know how to quantify that, and that's a big piece of understanding how AI is diffusing and being used across the economy. Because in addition to building trustworthiness, we're also trying to understand the economic impacts. And so that's a black box to us right now, and we're being asked to look into how do you know what firms are investing inside their firms.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. I wanted to look at the panel members if they have any questions for each other. Any specific questions? If not, Irian, yes.
A small remark about the focus on statistics, and I think it should have a more prominent place. It has now in assessing all this trustworthiness. But even then, all those statistical and quantitative tools around, it still remains a lot of normative questions and how to deal with that. And that especially needs the inclusion of more diverse groups, which is great. So it's both in a holistic perspective. There's a lot of room for quantitative tools, but ultimately it should be a qualitative assessment as well, how these quantitative measures are weighed. But that, I think, the bridge to the next point to the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a great bridge. So let's see if there are any questions in the audience. Let's take 2 or 3 questions and then go back to the panel. Yes, I see someone there. I will give you the microphone.
I've got a question about what I was saying Karine, but it's Claudine.
It's Audrey.
Oh, so Audrey,
That's fine.
sorry.
You can call me
Excuse
Karine.
me.
I'll be Karine
Excuse
today.
me.
No worries.
About insight in the investment. Is it possible for companies to report in their sustainability chapter? Because that's now also in scope for the annual audit by the public accountant. And is it an idea to put the efforts that the companies do for, how do you say that? Oh my God. The companies, the effort that they do for complying with human rights and other public values, letting them report that in their sustainability report and make that an object for auditing.
I'm in your hands. I think it's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that. But I would welcome reactions from organizations that do like sustainability reports and whether that it would make sense. I mean, I think, you know, sometimes these investments are going to be hard to disentangle. But if, you know, putting aside, not to say putting aside, but in terms of, I'm not talking now about measuring human rights impacts. I'm talking about, you know, part of understanding a risk assessment in AI is going to be understanding what the gains are, what the productivity gains are, what the positive impacts are. And so if we're going to really understand, does AI have a positive productivity impact, we need to know how firms are using it, if they're, and what it takes to get there. And that's where the investment is interesting to us. So I don't know. It's been a while since I was in the private sector, sorry. But I don't know if it makes the most sense in a sustainability report or in a corporate social responsibility report or wherever it belongs, or even not in a public report in some other way. We're working with there's a part of the OECD that specializes in finance, and so we're working with those sort of finance experts to figure out, you know, to try to crack that nut. But I welcome those ideas because I think it's a very interesting one.
Hi, just one more question on your catalog that you mentioned a moment ago. Can you give some more explanation or detail on the 600 tools you have available?
Yeah.
Do you have a way to internally rank them and help guide the user who maybe wants to find the most relevant one or the 5-star one, as opposed to going through all of them and trying to pick out the right one?
Yeah, so we don't, as the OECD, I'm just going to pull it up right here just so that I can show you. We don't ourselves assess them and say these are the best and these are the worst, because it's not the job that we're in, actually. You might argue that we should be in that, but for better or worse, we're not. You can, so there's two parts of the database. There's the tools part of the database and related use cases. So you can look at, you can search technically for like tools to remove bias, tools for robust or secure data collection processing. You can break the search down by whether the tools are technical tools. So there's ways to break, you're not going through 600, it's categorized down. And then there's some metrics. There's a part of the database that's focused on metrics where you can, like, you know, there's a tool here where the objective is performance management, and it's a mean intersection over union. These are very technical tools. And so you can, you know, or an anonymity set size, and then they link to use cases. So, you know, organizations that have used these tools and are willing to share use cases of how the tools work or put them, and so you can click on the tool and go there. So in that case, like in that category, okay, that has 144, but you can filter by different parts of a risk management cycle. So if you're looking to assess risk, you can filter by the assessment phase of risk. If you're looking for governing, so managing risk, and if you do that, you get a list of 32 tools, for example. So I encourage you to play with it. Sorry, it's very hard to probably imagine in the abstract because I'm messing with the you can probably see that I'm messing with the database here in real time. But I encourage you to go on it on the site and play with it, because I think you can narrow the search down based on different things that you're looking for.
Any other questions? I think the one that was first.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much. My name is Michaela Sullivan-Paul. I'm from the European Institute of Public Administration. And I just want to thank our panelists, our in-house statistician, for your input. I particularly appreciated your comments about using statistical approaches to kind of improve oversight and bias and discrimination mitigation. But I'm really interested about the specific point on synthetic data as kind of an immediate action that we could use. But maybe if you could elaborate, an open question to all of our panelists if they have contributions, but what some of the maybe dangers and implications of using synthetic data for these types of controls could be, and an over kind of dependence or reliance on synthetic data as we go forward and explore these options in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for this question. From a statistical perspective, I always compare synthetic data generation with the aggregation statistics provided by national offices of statistics. So there are certain protected grounds that are prohibited to store by public and private organizations, but under certain conditions by statistical bodies at the national level. What is a migration background of a certain citizen indexed by a certain number? Under certain conditions, aggregation statistics can be published for certain groups over 10 people, for instance. It's quite a strong and important mechanism for countries over the last decades to measure certain phenomena in economic development, in integration, in all different facets of society. At the same logic kind of applies to synthetic data generation. You can never prove that it's 100% privacy preserving from a statistical perspective. And then it's like it drops. From a legal perspective, okay, there's a certain 1% of a risk. Oh no, we should not do it. That's too short-sighted, I think, because the same logic applies as well, and you can place the same checks and balances for the example and the analogy I gave for the National Office of Statistics, aggregation statistics, disclosure of group information. What you are doing basically with synthetic data generation is, well, disclosing group aggregation statistics. You are mimicking or mirroring your probability distribution in a higher dimensional format. That's not really about disclosing privacy, but like from the legal perspective, they are so risk averse, and that's kind of, I find frustrating. There's an entire toolbox in the statistical domain that can be used for the better to shape our data-driven society and to give more insight and more trustworthiness about like the representativeness of data sets. That's kind of blocked by this extreme risk-averse mindset of especially legal experts. So that would be my plea. As a statistician, the same logic applies and is adopted over the last 15 decades. Please adopt the same logic and let's work together on providing the right checks and balances to kind of let synthetic data generation rock the near future.
I think I saw one additional question here in the front.
Thank you. Karin Cohn from the Center for AI and Digital Policy Europe. I wanted to drop my question, but based on your last intervention, and I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer, nobody is perfect. I would have this question because, okay, we know there are prohibited practices in the EU Act. We know that for high-risk AI system, we have a risk management system, which is in the end a human rights impact assessment, okay? The thing is, we have to measure the level of impacts on fundamental rights, okay? And here you say, oh, we can assess, it will be difficult for us to assess the level of impacts. I understand the point of statistics. You could even say, oh, you put a threshold of more than 50% of risks, then this is high risk. What do we do? Oh, but we are a group of engineers. We don't know about human rights. But wait a minute also, these AI systems are created by companies to not violate non-discrimination law is supposed to be respected by any companies in Europe. Non-discriminatory practices are prohibited. So it's not because you enter into a high-risk systems that it is legal. So I wonder where you put this into your scheme, because in the risk assessment methodology, the first point is to see whether it is legal and violation of certain rights are just illegal. Then after, I'm happy to measure the level of impact for other purposes, but here is just the application of the law, and companies are supposed to apply the law, and I'm sorry that it is difficult for our systems, but then even in the safety production legislation, you have the principle of precautionary principle, and then you shouldn't put it into the market, punto. So I would like to get your feedback on that, and I'm sorry for the legalistic question about these teams in charge of this kind of issues.
Maybe a short reaction from, I fully agree, and it's a good principle, non-discrimination. Then a lot of companies especially think, okay, we're not processing protected grounds, no direct discrimination. But discrimination can be much multifaceted in like higher dimensional proxy discrimination. So what happens is that a huge e-commerce platform in the Netherlands came to us as an NGO. He said, hey, we did a risk prediction for afterpay fraud, and we found ordering halal products has predictive value. Should we include that? And they decided themselves not to do so. But then type of SIM card, it comes with your metadata from your iPhone or Android, I don't know what you're using. And that correlates heavily with certain zip codes. It correlates heavily with certain migration backgrounds. It's so it's everywhere. And they have it happening live already for the last 5 to 10 years. We have no sight on it. And then I think there should be much more institutional protection to protect these kind of practices. And that's failing at the moment, I think. There's no oversight for the entire private sector, what kind of structural violation of fundamental rights happening over there. And it's an institutional problem.
Okay, anyone else? One question?
I was wondering, normally we only discuss about the normal use of AI and algorithms, but how do you see the use of AI and algorithms, and do you have some tips when it's being used for national defense or law enforcement? Thank you.
Anyone who wants to react? There's silence.
And if I go, we're never leaving this room. No, but in short, this is the most sensitive area of using the technology in general, not just AI. Unfortunately, if we look at the AI Act, a lot of it is excluded or carved out, or there are a lot of loopholes for use and implementation. So this goes back to the idea of using the existing legislation, the existing fundamental rights protection, and then the robust oversight and the civic engagement that will be needed, especially in the areas of national security, national defense, and use of AI in law enforcement, to be able to rein it in, right? Because the wording is not, the key wording here is not let's innovate. The key wording is here, let's safeguard. Because these systems are so intrusive in such areas for all of our lives. So let's not kid ourselves. We are all in that box together. So we need to be the ones also vigilant enough to safeguard our rights in these areas. So that's a short answer, and the long one can be over coffee.
Okay, great. I think that's a good closing remark. I have a few things to add. What we see here is a field that's very much changing from week to week even. The developments are going quite fast, and it can be very difficult to keep up from a policy perspective, to keep up as lawyers, but also to keep up as organizations that have to implement this. So it is very difficult to say you have to do the right thing, and the right thing is 100% this. You have to strive to do the thing you know is best. But you can also see, and there are a few points in this panel where you can point this out, there you can have a lot of inspiration from other fields, whether it is finance, whether it is statistics, whether it is social sciences. There are a lot of ideas, concepts, measures that you can, yes, we will, thank you, where you can, that you can use. So my message would be, try to look at sometimes even not related fields, but try to see if there are concepts that you can use, because those can be very interesting, and sometimes something exists for years, but goes unnoticed somewhere else. So there's quite a lot that you can do, but try to be patient about doing the right thing, but try to start today. So be patient, but do something today. That's quite a double message, but still, that's what I wanted to add to this. Thank you so much for this panel. And thank you all for joining us, and thank you for your questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of all the panels today.